Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. If they'd like to come to the stage. We have Shelby Strattan, who's Investment Manager at Investment Nebraska. We have Olga Polunina, Managing Director, Sustainability Investment Banking at Independence Point Advisors. Veronica Breckenridge, Founder and Managing Partner at First Bight Ventures. And Zeena Nisar, Policy Advisor at the National Security Commission for Emerging Biotechnology. Can I have a round of applause for our panel, please? Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I seem to be the only one now who's got a glass of wine. They had one just now, so it's just not just me. But anyway, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. If we could just sort of, at the start, to get it out of the way, let's sort of briefly set the scene with what does the shift in government funding priorities at the federal level mean for the sector as a whole and for companies looking to scale up in particular? So, if I could start with Veronica, your thoughts on, just to set the scene, where are we at in terms of federal funding and what it means for the industry?
Are you talking about the U.S.?
In the U.S.
I don't know. There's probably, maybe I'll let Zeena, because there's better people who's working with the government right now. Maybe you have more insights now.
But just to, Veronica, bring it back to you though. But when we were speaking the other day on the phone, you sort of had some thoughts about what you like to see from companies and how they should probably, yeah.
Well, in general, I actually don't think it's a bad thing. In business, we always said, there's people who will, if you're profitable, fundamental, solid economics always makes a better business. So without the crutch of the government, what it actually requires is companies need to stand on their own merit. So we actually believe it produces better and stronger companies and stronger economic case for some of the technologies that really is commercializable.
I mean, this mirrors the comments in the panel just before the break. Billy Hagstrom was talking about how, companies should be economically self-supporting. Another panelist said, we want a free market industry, not a tax credit industry. Does this sound reasonable?
Yeah, I would say so, and I would just kind of add, so we're at Invest Nebraska, we're not taking a super necessarily national or federal viewpoint, but we do manage kind of looking at the landscape of what's going on at the state level and then helping companies manage what resources are available at the state, and a lot of times that can trickle down from a federal level, but just really focusing on at the state level, companies that want to build and grow here, how we can be a resource to them. So that's a little bit more granular for Nebraska, but given where we are today.
Okay, so let's just talk about each of your sort of investment approaches. We've got a real range of panelists here. So maybe Shelby, we can start with you. Tell us a little bit about what you do, how your organization works, and your investment approach.
Yeah, so I had mentioned that we're a state organization. We are technically a nonprofit, Invest Nebraska 501c3, contracted by the state of Nebraska to invest in early stage high growth businesses here. And some of you may be familiar with the venture development organization model. So there are about a couple dozen venture development organizations, VDOs, across the country, mainly in the Midwest, Northeast, that kind of have really similar missions to us, and they're all structured a little bit differently. Some are also nonprofits, some are incorporated directly within local government as well. And ultimately, we all have the same mission, is economic development and job creation for our state. So we do work with other VDOs, but we're all kind of taking a state-specific lens to the work that we do, and that means that we are a little bit of an earlier stage investor. So at Invest Nebraska, we do primarily pre-seed and seed rounds. And we can lead rounds, we can participate, but our check size is usually about $125,000 to about $500,000 usually, and that's kind of on the higher end. We are also industry agnostic, so for specific questions in relation to the bioeconomy and biomanufacturing, I'll kind of default to the rest of the gals on the panel here, but we do invest in the bioeconomy and biomanufacturing, and this is kind of a part of our portfolio that we'd love to see more opportunity in as well. It's definitely a smaller part of our portfolio, so we're looking for new opportunities in this space, but ultimately we're a generalist investor. We're earlier stage than the rest of the investors here and on this panel, and kind of ultimately just not looking to be a strategic investor, but more of an ecosystem partner on the cap table.
Fantastic. Veronica, if we could come to you now, actually, tell us about your investment approach and the sort of companies you invest in this space.
Yeah, so we invest in seed and A, I would say, and one of the things that we believe fundamentally is in this space, you need to be really specialized. So we specialize only in biomanufacturing. We don't do anything else, and biomanufacturing of chemicals especially. We believe expertise matter, and the playbook is very different from traditional, I would say, Silicon Valley SaaS venture. So in a way, our portfolio construction is very much concentrated. We sit on the board, we lead, we get our hands dirty, very much involved in the operation. We don't just do a quarterly meeting and look at your financial. We get very, very hands-on. That's sort of fundamentally what we believe it takes. So Fund 1 was $1 million to $1.5 million in each of the check size that we write, and we get on the board. That's kind of our portfolio construction. Fund 2 we're currently working on is to double that check size, but still focus on seed and Series A companies.
What sort of expertise do your team bring to the boards? What are the background of the people in your company?
I would say there are three types of things that we bring. One is really around commercialization focus. So we try to help these companies to become real companies, meaning that they have a commercialization team, they have real financial discipline, governance, setting up those structures to behave like a company. The second thing that we do is to help with commercialization, setting both the priority of the commercialization and also finding partners and people who can help with those commercialization strategic partners. Lastly, one of the things we do is looking at non-dilutive fundings where it's possible, but also helping the companies to get to a point when we say non-dilutive, it's not just government grants, it's also being ready. What do you need to be ready for credit investors, for project finance investors, things like that to get them ready so that they could take advantage of non-dilutive funding when it's possible. So the equity, because this is going to be a CapEx intensive industry, to the extent you can leverage or get ready for those non-dilutive capital, that's really critical for equity capital to make a return.
Can you give us an example of a company you've had success with investment in this space?
We have a couple. We have a company right here. I wouldn't say we're success, but it's great to see that they have samples now, industrial microbes. They're turning, actually right now, ethanol into acrylic acid. We also have a company that is turning food waste, if any of you have distillery waste, into lubricants. They're working on actually retinol, a zero BChat product. And we also have a company that's working on microplastic polyurethane, and they're already selling it. And they already have a manufacturing network that can get to tens to hundreds of tons of that material, so they're actually selling it in the market.
Fantastic. Olga, if we could come to you, tell us a little bit about Independent Point Advisors and the sort of space that your clients are investing in.
Yeah, thank you. So we are a investment bank. So we're an advisor in the space. We actually pretty much take over right where Veronica and the team finished. So I generally advise companies at around Series B and beyond. So call it like $20+ million in deal size up to several hundred million. Just to lay the stage. And we're a very small boutique investment bank, but we focus almost exclusively on the energy transition and sustainable materials space. So I have a background in chemicals investment banking, not sadly actually chemicals, but I try to understand the space. And so the idea is to really advise companies on that scale up stage. So once they've already de-risked the technology and they have started to, or actually ideally actually commercialize their first products, and when they're looking for really either scale up capital to take themselves to the next stage, and they're thinking about a broader array of different financing sources. So whether that is sometimes late stage venture, a lot of times it's early growth, it's private equity, it's project financing, it's debt capital financing, it's strategic financing. So one of our roles is to help companies navigate what does that whole landscape look like? How do you actually navigate which one of those is better suited for whatever your objectives are at a given moment in time? And then how do you make your company look attractive to those different types of investors and their objectives, which can be very different to each other.
And how do you see the appetite of investors in this space at the moment, that size?
It's a very interesting market dynamic, let's just say. Look, I think the market is volatile at best and challenging at worst, but what I think Veronica already mentioned is companies that are delivering great technologies, that are truly innovating, that are creating products that customers are buying at unit economics that make sense, there is funding available for those technologies. I think the complexion of that funding has changed. Certainly federal government funding, as we've discussed, has become less available. I think there are many opportunities for venture growth, strategic capital to step into, frankly, that gap. And we're actively working to help people figure that out. But look, the capital is challenged but not gone. And so I would agree with what Veronica said earlier, which is the best companies will continue to get funded, and probably that means the stronger ones will survive.
Absolutely. Zeena, if we could come to you now. In your presentation earlier, you said that you were looking to mobilize private capital was one of your goals. Can you explain what that means and how you plan to mobilize that capital?
Absolutely. So the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, and I apologize if you were at my speaking slot earlier, is a bipartisan, bicameral legislative advisory commission. We were set up by the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, and we will sunset in December 2026. So we are meant to be a temporary but high-impact commission to advise the U.S. government to capture U.S. leadership in biotechnology. Our top line is that the U.S. government must invest $15 billion over 5 years in order to establish U.S. leadership in biotechnology and in some cases recapture U.S. leadership in biotechnology. We specifically scoped our recommendations to where the federal government is uniquely positioned to de-risk private capital. We identified an imperative to do so, given that U.S. capital markets are 4 times the size of China's. And so in reality, how you can have the most impact is by de-risking private sector investments in biotechnology. So when we characterized the biotechnology industry, and particularly outside the biopharma space, we noticed that there was a considerably difficult pathway to commercialization. You have uncertain or opaque regulatory pathways, high CapEx, expensive infrastructure requirements, a lack of pilot scale infrastructure, and an uncertain end-use market where you have products, biotechnology products, competing with market incumbents made with traditional manufacturing processes. So to de-risk private sector investments and to address those commercialization barriers specifically, we outlined recommendations to address the regulatory issues, address the gaps in infrastructure, but also to look at where the U.S. government can seed capital strategically in biotech sectors critical for national security, but also where the U.S. government can create more certainty around the end-use market. So in terms of push mechanisms, one of our recommendations is to establish an independence investment fund, a $1 billion government fund that's run by a non-government partner to seed investments and signal to private investors where the U.S. government is placing priority. And in particular, we outlined the need for this in biotechnology and bioindustrials. In terms of the pull mechanisms, again, where we can strategically de-risk private sector investments in biotechnology, we outline mechanisms that the government can better use, such as offtake agreements and advanced market commitments, to create that certainty of an end-use market, and so that startups can go to their investors and say, I have a product that is meeting a U.S. government need, there is an end-use market, and facilitate that intake of capital to then invest in infrastructure and scale up their products. So we really took a holistic approach of where can the U.S. government de-risk private sector investments? How can startups go back to their investors and say, I have more certainty, or I'm meeting this need. Here's where the U.S. government has placed their priorities, and be able to scale up to commercial products.
What sort of markets are you talking about? So you're saying the U.S. government would guarantee that there was a market. Can you give me some examples of some of those things?
Certainly. So let me clarify. When we describe a recommendation for offtake agreements and advanced market commitments, we're clear that we don't want the U.S. government to be the only market or the only buyer of this product, but rather we see the fact that government procurement, the government is a large buyer and a considerable market that could be used and leveraged more strategically. And there are existing needs in the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, that could be met with biotechnology products. So, for example, a great example of this is you can biomanufacture lubricants for machinery that's used in DOE, like hydraulic machinery. This can be made with biotechnology, and it's an existing need that should the U.S. government decide, we want to place a priority or a premium for biotechnology products and purchase them specifically, creates that kind of pull and that certainty for companies making these products to then pull in private capital.
And this $1 billion fund, this sounds interesting. How would that funding work?
The funding?
Would it be match funding, or how would
Yes, so it would be appropriated $1 billion by Congress, and it's intended to be an evergreen fund, meaning that the profits returned from the investments would then fulfill and continue to sustain the fund. The fund is designed to provide investments on the scale of $1 to $10 million. Again, not a catch-all, not a solution to everything, but a way to seed capital and bring in that private capital and signal U.S. government priorities in critical technology sectors, not just for national security, but also economic competitiveness and resiliency.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Shelby.
and I would just say, to kind of step in on that, that's essentially what Invest Nebraska does, but at the state level is that it's an evergreen fund, and it just kind of signals the state's priority to invest in early stage businesses. Again, it's broader than just the bioeconomy, but that's certainly one of the pillars that is a focus area for Invest Nebraska and the state more broadly. And we have that kind of priority to catalyze private investor dollars as well. So one component of our fund is that we need to be matched 100% by private investor dollars. So we kind of are able to write a check, but we're not able to wire funds until that has been matched by other investors as well. Because in addition to catalyzing economic development and job creation and new opportunities for industries and the bioeconomy here in the state, we also want to get other investor dollars moving, because ultimately one of the reasons we were created and a lot of venture development organizations are created is because of a lack of other funders in certain geographic areas. So just kind of getting that momentum going for other people, institutions, family offices, venture capital firms to keep writing checks.
The topic that came up when we met before was about how states can maybe work together and sort of draw on expertise from around the country. Veronica, you had some thoughts about this, about how Texas, because you're based in Texas, is that right?
Yes, Houston.
Combining maybe the expertise of Texas with the feedstock expertise of Nebraska. Any thoughts on
And
that?
this would be a great I know an SCEP is coming to visit Houston. One of the areas I see as a huge opportunity for the U.S. is we have the Midwest that has rich feedstock, and 90% of the chemicals that are produced is in our Gulf Coast. So especially if we talk about the chemical industry, in terms of commercializing it, getting it through fermentation is one thing, getting it to actual product is another thing in terms of downstream capability. So fostering those cross-state relationship and maybe thinking about how to come into combining with the state funding, also the federal funding, to help some of these startups so that they can actually get through their downstream, a lot of my companies at least, downstream is actually critical for commercialization. If we can work across the states to build that, to help America to recapture, to your point, those leaderships and establish a better, more resilient supply chain, that would be really, really, I think, beneficial in creating those supply chains, not just looking specifically in one state, but fostering those cross-state collaboration would be great, would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we had talked about too was on our phone call, kind of as we were all getting ready for this, Veronica was like, how does it work as Invest Nebraska? Do you have the capacity to invest across state lines? And the answer is yes, as long as there's a prominent Nebraska presence for that entity. And so we're both very pro-Nebraska and pro-industry. And so in terms of Nebraska, we want the best for kind of job opportunities, again, economic development here, but we also want the best for the industry because we supply so much of the feedstock to the industry as well. And so ultimately, if companies are building here, but they have a presence elsewhere too, where we can work across state lines, work with other venture development organizations at an early stage or later stage companies that are kind of doing more downstream or facility planning, that's absolutely an option too.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem that if you're trying to compete with sort of legacy global fossil fuel industries, you're all going to have to work together.
I would say so.
So, Olga.
No, and one lesson to take away from this conversation, right, is if you're a startup either thinking about which states you might be going to next in terms of your areas of development or even thinking about just sources of funding, would strongly encourage everyone to investigate not just the federal sources of funding, but all different types of funding that are available at state levels in multiple different states, because I think one of my learnings over even just the last week is every state, especially many states in the Midwest, have very different approaches to this that are very constructive and probably have lots of opportunities to be leveraged.
Absolutely. So looking forward, if we're looking to truly accelerate the scale-up of US industrial biomanufacturing, where do you think across the industrial biomanufacturing ecosystem do we need more investment? Which part of it? Is it the innovation? Is it the market development? Where is it? Where do we need more money to be poured in?
I can just give a short answer to start. And I'm going to say early stage. I mean, we need more early stage opportunities and companies that, especially, I mean, we're looking at it from the lens of Nebraska and kind of our pipeline and innovation that we're seeing here. And we see, being a generalist investor, innovation across a lot of different spaces, especially other spaces that are not necessarily as capital intensive, like the bioeconomy or biomanufacturing. And so really kind of having a gap at the early stage. And then for these companies and innovators, knowing that there are resources available like Invest Nebraska or other venture development organizations where they may be building is, I think, an important lens to have.
I'm going to say pilot facility infrastructure, especially pilot facilities, because this is a manufacturing industry, and most people don't understand in software is we actually have to have a process to be validated at pilot scale before it take it to commercial scale. And this is very different from software. And that pilot scale facility is expensive for any single company, startup, to actually build. And it's actually also very wasteful because they don't need it for very long. They only need it for 6 months. So the best way is to how do we get a shared facility in terms of a pilot facility to allow more of these companies to be much more capital efficient in developing and validating their process before they do risk. We've had experiences where we try to scale process without going through it, and that's where we lost billions of dollars. And this is a critical step to de-risk all of that, and is actually relative to the billions that we've thrown, this is much cheaper. You know, we're talking about tens of millions, not billions of dollars. And that's been one of the critical unlock that I see that we lack. I mean, you have bio-based Europe, right? I think a model like that in the US would be really critical. That's commercially driven, helping really to validate the pilot process is a key to unlock this industry.
Why do you think it's lacking at the moment?
One of the issues that we have, why do we think it's lacking? I think there has been, one of the things is federal funding has been really focused on research, right? So if you look at all the, and the other thing is all of the bioeconomy, most of the people who are most excited are unfortunately biologists. But the problem is, especially in my industry where I'm looking to convert into chemicals and materials, you cannot do that without downstream. And that's not a step you can skip. So it doesn't matter how great the biology is, doesn't matter how low cost the biology is to commercialize that product, you still need the downstream. And people forget that in that manufacturing process, there's been a lot of, also I think Silicon Valley investors who try to use the software playbook, I would say, to scale these companies. And unfortunately, the software playbook doesn't work in this case because it's manufacturing. I was an industrial engineer, so I understand intrinsically how do you scale a manufacturing process, and you cannot scale it until you actually prove it at certain level because it is physical and it's manufacturing.
Just
the other point, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to just double tap what Veronica said. That was an issue we also identified, that there was, venture capital willing to fund early stage technology development and private equity willing to, again, invest in proven technologies and processes. But we noticed there was a significant gap when it comes to bioindustrials of pre-commercial pilot scale infrastructure. And we identified that being a strategic place where, again, where the US government can place its hand on the scale and support that scaling process, and really through pre-commercial facilities, pre-commercial infrastructure, de-risk that commercialization pathway.
I'm really happy to hear that, because one of the things that I would highlight is absolutely right. Venture capital dollars are available for early stage. At the late stage, once you're commercially viable, once you have product unit economics between private equity and large scale strategics, there's not plenty of capital, but the good amount of capital that is available. And one of the problems with the pilot stage or the early commercial stage is almost by definition, the unit economics don't work, right? The pilot scale facilities, your unit economics are never going to be the same as they will be at true product scale. And so when you ask any private equity investor or you ask most strategic capital, they will say, well, that's not a unit economic equation that I will invest in, and I'm certainly not going to invest in that equation for something that's only ever designed to be around for 6 to 9 months. So who is stepping in to fund that capital? And honestly, it would be great if we can figure out a federal or state solution to step in to give that gap, because at least from where I sit, it's really difficult to see true private capital making those economics make sense.
And from your point of view, where else would you like to see more capital invested?
Well, once you've done the pilot, you need to scale up. And that is really where I think capital has, to a certain extent, flown into the space in the 2020 and 2021 timeframe, and unfortunately has flown in meaningfully slower since then. And at the end of the day, it's wonderful to have lots of R&D ideas and lots of early stage companies, but if we will never revolutionize the industrial economy without really replacing plastics, materials, agricultural products, ingredients at scale, which requires true scale investments.
So when we're talking about the scale up, drawing on lessons from companies you've invested in, are there any pieces of advice you'd like to give companies embarking on the scale up journey? Should we start with Veronica?
I would say there are two things, certainly from our investment thesis that we focus on. One is we like drop-in replacement chemicals more than anything else because novel chemicals takes 20 years to commercialize. So we want our companies to be able to prove their validity as quickly as possible. So I would pick in terms of go-to-market. You can do a lot of other things. Beauty of biology is flexible, but focus on a short-term drop-in replacement. That's number one. Number two that we also advise a lot of our company on is pick a go-to-market that has a higher value. So, for instance, like I talked about, one of the companies converting food waste to lubricant, but their BChat product is retinol. And retinol is very expensive. And you can actually be a profitable plant for tons of production, right? So you don't need to scale huge amount, and you can be very profitable on your own. So picking specialty chemical as your go-to-market BChat is also very important.
Shelby?
I would say being probably the earliest stage representative on this panel is we take a little bit of a simpler lens. It's really kind of, a lot of times we're in conversations with companies that just kind of have early science or kind of an early idea. And so it's, if that's what we're looking at, we want to see, is there a compelling eventual go-to-market strategy, plan for commercialization, and ultimately what we're also looking at is team. And then also if you have a small team right now and if you're just getting started, making sure that you have a strategic lens in team building, because that commercialization angle is going to be really important, having kind of a sales function or strategic function in that capacity, and the ability to fundraise going forward, because I think we all know in the bioeconomy space and biomanufacturing, fundraising is a little bit challenging, and kind of the amount that you have to raise is a lot more than other industries as well. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Fantastic. We have no time left on the clock. So unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Fantastic panel. Thank you very much, our panelists.